Thank you for joining us. My name is Felicitas Sang. Let me introduce the topic of today. Today's topic is business case sustainability. So why sustainability for business? I know when most of us are starting businesses, we never think of the long term. We do, but how do we plan for it? So today's session is about sustainability. And our facilitator is the beautiful Reshma. Reshma is the CEO of InteStrat Services Ltd and a partner to Kina Advisory. So that is why we're having Reshma today speaking to us on why sustainability for business and why sustainability for any organization. So that is why we're having this session in this. So I'll introduce who Invest in Africa is. So I've previously said that my name is Felicitas Sang. I work for Invest in Africa as a program support assistant. So who we are at Invest in Africa. Invest in Africa is a Pan-African leading accelerator organization. So we work across various sectors and to achieve skills and greater impact for different SMEs. So we are an SME-centered organization and we are a non-profit organization. So because we are a non-profit organization, we are able to coordinate and work with several organizations. One of them is multinational organizations, corporates, associations, financial institutions who share a common purpose to empower enterprises and create positive impact. So that is who Invest in Africa is. Our vision is prospering African economies. I know most of us have read that the next biggest economy is Africa. So how are we preparing for that? So Invest in Africa is here to do that, to prepare SMEs for the biggest global impact and also the biggest economy. So that is what we believe in at Invest in Africa. So our target is 250 SMEs getting jobs and a contract to be one of 1 billion worth of contract won by our SMEs. So if we are to be the biggest economy, then we need to train ourselves. We need to work towards it. So far, what is our impact at Invest in Africa? We have over 3,000 SMEs registered. That is on our platform. We have a platform called Biashara.now. So Biashara.now has over 3,000 SMEs. And so far, we have been able to support 80,300 jobs supported through our platform. Through the platform, we're able to get SMEs receiving tenders, and we follow through to know what was the impact of that tender. If a multinational posted that tender on the platform, what was the impact? Who won that tender? So that is who we are at Invest in Africa. And so far, we have had 300 million worth of contracts won by our SMEs, and also we have financed. As an organization, we don't finance, we link you to financial organizations. So we have several partners in our platform that we work with. We have Equity Bank, Family Bank, GT Bank, several financial institutions that facilitate loans. And then we have also trained over 2,000 SMEs. So actually these numbers the trainings should be higher, as of this year alone, since COVID, we've done over 3,000 trainings. So that is Invest in Africa. So why are we doing this session in this time? At Invest in Africa, we are working on the Mastercard Foundation. This program is funded by Mastercard project. So it's a Mastercard project. So the Mastercard project is titled SME Recovery and Resilience Program. So that is what we do. That is why we are here. During this COVID season, we got funding from Mastercard to work on trainings for SMEs through Masterclass, and this is one of those. That is one Masterclass. And also our resilience program is on coaching. So we have SMEs that are undergoing coaching, business coaching, and this program is supposed to implement practical personalized plans for the SME. So coaching is one-on-one. So that is what we still have ongoing currently. And please, if you're still interested, kindly write to us. And then we also have access to finance, which we are doing with EY. EY is supporting Invest in Africa to work on training our SMEs on how to access finance and what is the journey for you to get finance. So that is what we're doing. Kindly apply if you're still interested. This is an ongoing process. And then we have a Knowledge Academy. Our Knowledge Academy is sort of our virtual library. So everything that you need to learn about any conversation we've ever had, please go to our Knowledge Academy and Beshara.now. You'll be able to get other masterclasses we've held, any other information that is important for any SME. And then we also have peer-to-peer session. This is a session for SMEs that have made it, those big SMEs, local SMEs. So we call them Tier 1 SMEs, or we call them SMEs that are starting to make it. They are becoming global. So what was their journey? So we have SMEs that come to speak to us on their journey, ask sort of a mentorship session. So that is why we have peer-to-peer session. So that is our SME COVID-19 resilience program. So we have this masterclass today that it's Reshma will be speaking to us. So why are we having this masterclass? So this masterclass is to understand sustainability. What is sustainability? And as an organization, why do you need sustainability? Why do you need to understand sustainability? And as a business, what are the best practices to incorporate into building your business? And then again, as a business, sustainability, integration into one's business model. How do you do it? If you have a business model, how do you do it? So that is why we're having this session that is facilitated by Reshma. And I will just briefly introduce Reshma and then she will introduce herself further. So Reshma has over 20 years experience across a broad and rare combination of expertise, spanning business strategy, performance, risk management, change management, tax and environmental, social, and governance. So as we said, if we are going to be the biggest global economy country or Africa, then this is what we need. We need someone like Reshma to tell us, as a business, how do we remain sustainable? What are the risks that we are going to go through? So Reshma comes in all rounded for us as a business to understand where we're going through. If we need to discuss what our business risk, Reshma will be able to do that. If we need to integrate our sustainability in business, Reshma will be able to answer that. So kindly, don't hesitate to ask any questions. Reshma will be here to answer that. So please make full use of Reshma. Reshma, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you, everybody. As Phyllis has said, I've got quite a broad range of things that I've done in the past, and I'm hoping that now you'll start seeing sustainability from my perspective, because I'm very passionate about this topic for one particular reason, is that we live in a world where if we lose that world, we have nowhere else to live. And therefore, sustainability becomes quite a key part of what we need to do. But at the end of the day, we're asking businesses to approach their businesses from a sustainable perspective. And as somebody who's primarily worked in the commercial world, I keep asking the question, if it doesn't work for a business, why will a business do it? And for me, it's constantly been about how to show businesses that sustainability is actually in alignment with what they're trying to do as a business, rather than something different or something on the side that needs to happen. And therefore, I'm hoping that today we can really look at that and really get to the bottom of that. So what I'm hoping by the end of this session, that we can define what sustainability is. We can have an overview of the changing trends in sustainability. We can understand how sustainability best practices actually relate to our own business operations. And we can start appreciating how integrating sustainability agenda and the environmental, social, and governance best practices into our business models can actually enhance our core business value drivers. So the approach is very much business driven. It's very much around value. It's around risk. And by doing that, we are actually creating sustainable businesses. And what I want to show with this session, not just sustainable as people understand it to be ESG, but sustainable from the perspective of financial sustainability as well, to help your businesses survive in the longer term. So when we define sustainability, what do we actually mean by the word sustainability? The term sustainability was defined in 1987 in a United Nations General Assembly in a commission report called the Brundtland Commission Report. At the time, it was defined as sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, back in 1987, when they put this definition together, they were focused very much on the aspects of environment. So when they put this definition, the focus was environment. But over time, since 1987 to date, this is the one definition of sustainability that it's held its own. But over time, the big change that's happened is, in addition to environment, people started looking at sustainability to cover not just environment, but natural, social, and economic resources as well. And it started embedding the environment, health, social equity, as well as economic development to have a much more broader, all-encompassing definition of sustainability. But sustainability as a term can be very broad, and most people will say, so now how do I apply that into my business? And therefore the term ESG got coined. Now ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and it refers to the three central pillars for measuring sustainability for a business. Environmental, the E, taking care of your surroundings and the natural environment. The S, social, taking care of your people. And when we say people here, we mean those impacted by your business operations, not just your employees, but your local communities, your suppliers, your customers, they're all your people. And then governance, doing business efficiently and with integrity, and how your company policies itself with a focus on leadership, broad diversity and structure, internal controls, audit, corruption, and as well as bribery. So as we move into the next, I'd like to say, please, we'd allocated about an hour and then half an hour for questions, but I am happy to take questions as we go along. I just seem to have a slight technical issue that I've lost the chat box. So Felicis, if I miss anything, then please just alert me on that, please. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I've managed to move it to the side, so hopefully I can see it there. So what I'd like to look at next are what I call global trends in sustainability. Global because for most people, these are global, international, big trends. And then it's like, well, why does it matter to me? I'm sitting here in Kenya or Africa. I'm an SME. Why does this matter to me? And a lot of these trends actually impact us on our day-to-day as individuals and on our day-to-day as companies. And that's why I term it global on that basis. And I'd like to touch on a few of these because they're actually quite relevant. So for example, Blackrock. Blackrock is the largest asset manager company in the world. And every year, the CEO will actually issue a statement to the global CEOs of the world. And that statement is taken quite seriously by all international companies because they are the trendsetters. And sustainability has been a theme in that CEO statement for a number of years running. But not only have they put it out as a statement, they've actually made commitments and have actually shown that they have increased the amount of mutual funds that they have put around sustainability from about 2013 to 2019, an increase of about 67%, and now is at about 760 billion. Now, you might say, well, that's out there, that's, how do I access it? There are many ways that companies even sitting here can access that. The key message here is there's a significant flow of funding going into sustainable operations. And the more we can turn our operations into sustainable operations, we actually put ourselves in a position where we could access those funds. If we don't do that, then we definitely don't have access to those funds. The next big one that I'd like to talk about is COVID. We can't ignore that one. It's in our face every single day. And with COVID and the impact of COVID, a lot of people speculated that the importance of the environment and the importance of climate change will actually change. It will not be as important going forward because everybody's focused around COVID. what they've found is because of the impact and the slowdown in the economy, there's been about an 8% reduction in greenhouse gases because of COVID. So not only has the importance of climate change and environment gone up, actually people are starting to see that you can make an impact. So not is it important, but it is actually possible. And that's the impact that COVID has had. So governments are beginning to look at strategies in which they can reduce the environmental impact. The second impact that COVID's had is that 75% of companies around the world have complained about supply chain disruptions. And this has impacted a lot of people along the chain. And people are starting to look at how can I create supply chains that are more sustainable so that if COVID continues or if there is any other international pandemic or any other international impact, how can I stop that from impacting my supply chain? So that's another way in which COVID has impacted sustainability. The third way is where, in the same way that sustainability definition started on environment, a lot of the sustainability discussions in the world were around climate change and environment. What COVID has done is shown the impact and the importance of the S in ESG, the social impact. Because what we've seen in the last year and a half or so is the real impact on people, the social impact. So COVID has really emphasized that we really need to focus on the S as much as we focus on the E of ESG. Some of the other ones, and I won't go through all of them, but I'd like to touch on a couple of them because some of them I'll come back to later on in the presentation. Social media is another one that's impacting sustainability. Information is free flowing. What happens if I take the example of Rio Tinto and what happened in Australia, it might have seen it as Aboriginal site, a small operation in Australia, actually became a global phenomenon to actually impact one of the largest mining companies in the world, requiring its CEO and its chair to actually resign because of that. So we can see the impact of social media today, that whatever we are doing has that spread. Some of the other aspects I'd like to touch upon are things around like legislation. So like human rights due diligence legislation options for the European Union. Might again say that's the European Union. What does that have to do with us? They're looking at legislation being implemented in 2021 on this. And the implementation of that legislation would actually mean it doesn't just apply to EU companies, it applies to EU companies alongside their whole supply chain. So any company sitting here, let's say in Kenya, that wants to do business, wants to supply any goods and services to that company will be subject to that human due diligence. So we can see how legislation that's being implemented in one part of the world is actually coming to affect us here today. Some of the other aspects around, for example, sustainable development goals, I'll pick up on that a bit later in this presentation. Elements of around global reporting initiatives, I'll pick up on that as well a bit later. The aspects around diversity, they have become quite critical. And here diversity, not in terms of just gender, but in terms of a number of color, ethnicity, sexual orientation, a number of things. And we'll look at that when we look at what ESG actually means. That's there. Even elements like data protection, when we look at governance aspects of it, are also quite critical. We are now on a Zoom call. Our world has completely changed since COVID. We're spending a lot of time here. And what happened in April 2020? Loads of Zoom bombings were happening, and people were just, that's all part of your data protection, and that all comes under governance as well. And that comes to show just how small our world is shrinking, that's why they're global trends. Elements around recycle, reduce, reuse. We're seeing industries like the fashion industry, for example, even evolving itself around some of these aspects of them, using things like plastic and sustainable consumption of materials to turn their industries around. So what these global trends are providing is innovation. basically an opportunity there to think outside the box and think how some of these global trends can actually help you unlock value, create a unique selling point for your business. And therefore, when we look at the business case, I'd like you to have some of these aspects at the back of your mind as well. So we touched upon on the earlier slide on SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So these were adopted by all United Nations states in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. And the 17 development goals are laid out on the slide there. And actually a number of people are now very familiar with these SDGs, and a number of companies are actually adopting them. When we look at the graphs here, kind of the top 100 companies that were part of this survey, and this is globally, 39% of them in 2017 actually connected their business activities to SDGs. That number rose to 69% in 2020. When you take that to a much broader sample of about 250 companies, in 2017 it was 43%. In 2020, that rose to 72%. So we're seeing more and more companies actually linking their business activities to these SDGs. And why is the question that I would like to pose out there, because you could turn around and say, well, this is all, what does the private sector have to do with this? I mean, these are some of the elements there that you should have governments and multilaterals should be focused on. And the answer is very simple. The private sector actually is an indispensable partner and plays a critical role in developing global development. In developing countries, the private sector constitutes an average about 60% of the GDP, while generating 90% of the jobs and 80% of the cash flow. SMEs on average take about 50% of that. So when you think about that, then SMEs within the private sector as a whole, play a significant part in development. And therefore, if they're not going to focus on the SDGs as well, we don't have a chance of meeting these SDGs. The other aspect of these SDGs is the financing gap. So when we look at what needs to be achieved to meet these SDGs, currently we're looking at about $2.5 trillion financing gap, of which Africa alone accounts for 1.3 trillion of that. That's money that needs to flow in order to meet these SDGs. And if that money needs to flow, it needs to flow to those activities that are going to help to meet these SDGs. And if you're part of those activities, then those funding will flow in your direction as well. Now, when we look at these, I'd like, some of these can seem as very large company, multinational. I'd like to just spend a bit of time just talking about real life examples of real SMEs who've taken on board some of these SDGs and have actually created business models around these SDGs. So one of the first examples is a company called Bamboo Bikes in Ghana. So Bamboo Bikes was created as a way of creating local jobs and promoting low carbon transport. So for all its employees, about half of its employees are women, and for every bike that they sell, they actually give one school child a bike to help them get to school and reduce the travel time. Now, question is, why bamboo? It's a miracle plant. It grows fast. It absorbs carbon. It's readily available in the local area in which this was produced in Ghana, and it provided an opportunity for children's education and women employment. When you look at all those aspects, they all fell under the SDG. In addition, what the bamboo bikes committed to do, for every one bamboo that they cut, they grew 10 more. So that was also meeting with the SDGs. Bamboo is actually stronger than steel. So the bikes were stronger. They were 100% recyclable. And actually, that is one of the company now its biggest market is not Ghana anymore. Its biggest market is exports to Europe. So it started as a very small local SME and now has become an exporter of bamboo bikes, all because of its focus to try and solve some of these issues. Another example from Kenya is a company called Peak Vision. And Peak Vision was looking at the market opportunity where a lot of the equipment that was required for eye examination was very bulky, very fragile, and very expensive equipment, which meant that they couldn't really go out and reach the rural world out there. And so what they created was a mobile phone app and a $5 chip that could be used on a smartphone that would turn that handset into a diagnostic tool that was the equivalent of a $25,000 equipment, which basically allowed them the mobility and the cost saving to actually go out there to work with people in rural Kenya and spot conditions such as cataracts, etc. So that's one example. Another example is around insurance, a company called Microinsure. And Microinsure focuses on Asia and Africa, and where they look at models. Their model is based on like the computer game or the app called the Angry Birds side, and they have tapped into an opportunity there that's worth $40 million. And what they've done is they've linked up with telecoms providers, and they provide the basic insurance for free. And then if people start seeing the benefits of those medical insurances, etc., they can then buy bolt-ons as part of that. So these are examples of companies that have been created around trying to solve some of these SDGs. And by doing that, have actually created business models for themselves, growth, not only locally, but as well as growth internationally. So I'm hoping that's beginning to give a flavor of really what sustainability can do for businesses. When we look at businesses, traditionally, we started out with businesses being all about profits. It's all about the stakeholders, the owners. And if we did anything else around corporate social responsibility, it was an add-on. It was something nice to do. It wasn't always linked to our business. And there were usually one-off single initiatives that weren't really linked. Over time, we've seen a shift, and people are starting to look at their businesses from a risk perspective. Although they were looking at risk, they were still looking at trying to protect risk or exposure to risk. So the primacy was still the shareholders. They were trying to protect the interests of the shareholders. They were trying to remedy and manage risks. And a lot of the work around sustainability was focused around aspects of audit and compliance. Over time, we've seen that that model in itself also doesn't work. And really what we need to be doing as businesses is focus on value creation. And really that's where we are today. A number of businesses are redefining their purpose of the business and saying, really, why am I here as a business? What is my broader role? And looking at it from the perspective of a multi-stakeholder driven approach. Because as you can see from the wheel here, our stakeholder is not just our owners. All the people that are listed here actually can impact our business significantly. And unless we start managing them as stakeholders, the entity that will suffer is actually our business. So our suppliers, the government, trade unions, NGOs, activists, financial community, consumers, the local affected communities, our workers, and of course our stakeholders, our shareholders and our owners as well. So the approach has moved into a broader business purpose, and it's moved into a multi-stakeholder perspective. It's more integrated. Businesses are beginning to see that what they're doing in one area impacts the other area, and therefore they need to start looking at their business as a one. They're looking at competitive advantage and looking at ways that they can find that competitive advantage. If we go back to the example of bamboo bikes, stronger than steel, 100% recyclable, of course the international market will want to go for those. So they've found their competitive advantage there as well. It's looking at standard setting internally, but also externally. The international standards around sustainability have advanced significantly, and we'll touch upon that quite shortly as well. And they're beginning to see that it makes good business sense. It's not anymore a nice to have as we've seen in the past. It's business, and this is what it's really about. So with that, we look at the business case and why is sustainability important. And you can split the business case into 4 key elements. You've got commercial, reputation, societal, and compliance. And there's a lot of research and empirical evidence that actually shows that sustainability practices improve business performance and increase the company's long-term survival. In a recent study that was done, it was seen that 90% of the 200 studies analyzed concluded that good ESG standards actually lowered the cost of capital. 88% showed that good ESG practices actually resulted in better operational performance. And those that adopted standard setting could see that that increased productivity by 16%. And 80% of the ones who were sampled actually showed that their stock price or the value of the company positively correlated with the good sustainability practices as well. And we will, as we dive into these 4 elements, we will actually look at how this is possible by looking at real life examples as well. So when we talk about commercial and we talk about elements such as controlling our costs, we have an example, a Kenyan example, where one of the company's African Logistic Properties, by introducing green technology in its warehouse, actually managed to reduce its operating costs. So it is one of 17 warehouses in the emerging market that has received EDGE certification. And the scheme was all around reducing environmental impact of the building. So they particularly looked at areas such as putting in measures around including solar panels, reflective paint that reduced energy use, taps and landscape that conserved water, as well as more sustainable building materials. And this was quite a bold move, given how competitive commercial real estate is, and for them to actually take this investment. But what they found is not only did that investment lead to about 600 tons of carbon dioxide emission reduction a year, it actually saved them $16,000 a month in their operating and utility costs, reducing their operational costs by half. And I think those kind of stats actually talk to themselves. So it's great that we've got the carbon dioxide emissions. Not every company might think like that. I hope more companies think like that. But if a reduction in operating costs is going to make you do it, I'm happy. Go for it. Get it done, as long as it leads to some kind of sustainability as well. So by doing that, it's reduced its costs. It's actually contributed to some of its competitive and stable markets. We're also seeing certain edges, like the bamboo bikes as an example here of creating a competitive market for itself by bringing a new product to the market. It can reduce risks. So here, risks, I'd like to talk about a Ghanaian example. So a Ghanaian trucking company found that every month there was a shortage on what it expected in terms of fuel usage versus costs of about $50,000 a month. And therefore, clearly, there was some siphoning of fuel happening as part of that. Now, being a logistic company and being very where costs and operating costs are key with lower margins, that was an issue that the company had to actually address. There was another company, a ladies run company, that was looking at a women's only trucking company. So what they did was they partnered together. So they said, fine, we will be your customer because we need trucking services. We will also be a partner and drive company of the time. And the siphoning stopped, and we were basically looking at not only a reduction in cost, but also an more impressive health and safety record as well. So there's a bit, okay, you can say I'm a bit biased, I'm a woman, but you can't deny some of those facts as well. It can also protect and attract investment. So here we're talking around financing and even elements of exit options and value. So if you're more sustainable and you have more people who are looking at sustainability as part of their criteria for investment, then you will be ticking a lot more boxes when they're looking at that investment process. And we're also seeing, for example, in 2019, and with COVID, there's not so much data around 2020, 2021 at the moment, about 465 billion in sustainable finance was raised globally. And this was more than 78% from the previous year. So a 78% jump in 1 year. The bad news is only 3% of that was linked to Middle East and Africa. So that's bad news, but I can turn that around and say, actually, that's positive in the sense of look at the opportunity. If it's increasing 80% per year, and we are currently only tapping into 3% of that, that means there's a much bigger margin that I can tap into if I have the right product and the right business case for it. So I think there's a lot more that can be done there. There's a lot more that's going under social innovation as well, a lot more funding in terms of businesses that try to solve social problems. So elements around biodegradable plastic out of seaweed, empowering women, solar power projects, one of the funds, SHREP funds in terms of social entrepreneurship, I mean, they improved lives of about 622 million people in 190 countries. And helped mitigate about 192 million tons of carbon. And they had a significant amount of funding going into that. So there's quite a lot that you can see around the commercial side. When we look at the reputational side, and we look at the stakeholders that we have today, we have Amu Power in Lamu that was stopped because of the environmental, social, and impact by the local communities. We have a change in demographics where we see more and more of the younger generation becoming a lot more keener on elements of sustainability, a lot more vocal around elements of sustainability, a lot more choosy around what they buy, where they buy it from. They want to understand product of all the way to the end, from the end product to throughout the whole supply chain, and actually want to work for companies that have a much broader vision than just making profits. And therefore, it's become a key part of reputation as well. But more than that, the companies that focus on that find that they are able to increase their productivity because they're able to attract and retain the right level of staff. So in a recent International Labour Organization pilot that was done, I would say is about June 2019, the feedback from the pilot actually showed by implementing more sustainable practices around health, safety, communicating more with its workers, and actually looking at workers' compensation, it managed to improve its labor productivity with an increase of 27%, reduce product defects and rejections, which contributed to an approximate saving about $9,000 to $10,000 per entity, reduced work absenteeism by about 11.8%, from 11.8% to about 2.8%, and reduced its employee turnover rate from 11.7% to 1.9%, all by introducing some of these practices. Some of the other companies like Red Lands Rose, a floriculture business in Kenya, found that by actually putting in place better healthcare support, childcare support, better health services, more alternative, flexible working arrangements to improve work-life balance for its employees, its unplanned leave declined by 25%, and productivity improved significantly within 1 year of just opening a childcare facility. So again, all that actually equates to money at the end of the day. On the societal side of things, when you look at the resources that we need today to run on the projection of where business is today, we don't just need, we need 1.77 worlds. We only have one, and we need 1.77 of it to actually sustain where we are today. Now, those are depleting resources. They are depleting resources that we need to survive, but they're also depleting resources in terms of the raw materials that we need to use for our businesses. So unless we start looking at sustainability from our raw material perspective as well, you can say, I care about this as an individual, but what does this have to do with my business? Well, your business will suffer too. If it doesn't have the right raw materials, it will suffer too if it can't actually get it to market because of supply chain disruption, droughts, floods, etc. The quality of resources, the quality of your product will go down if the quality of resources go down. And if we don't actually focus on poverty and livelihood are the people in the world who potentially are going to be our customer base going forward. And unless we do something about that, we are actually impacting our customer base as well. So again, you can look at that and saying that's a bigger problem beyond me, but any part that we can play towards it actually can have a direct impact within our business as well. And then we have elements of compliance. So costs and liability. Most companies have some kind of duty to its owners to keep costs down and to have those profits up. Anything that you can do to reduce your costs, as we've seen in some of these examples, is actually part of your duty from a compliance perspective. Anything that you do that actually leads to liabilities and damage is part of your compliance perspective, whether it's by law or by contract. Uh, Directors all have fiduciary duties around sustainability nowadays as well. And therefore, any breach of those is a breach of their own duties. Increased accountability. Increase accountability in terms of disclosure in financial statements, and we'll look at that in terms of a number of international initiatives around the world where they're bringing more structure to reporting around sustainability, but also increase accountability from like financial institutions where you need funding. Um, and there's increased regulations and disclosure requirements. One example of that we looked at was the EU human rights one as an example there. So as businesses, it's no longer moving from a nice to do, nice thing to do. It's actually turning into a responsibility. And by not doing it, a significant liability exposure for the business. So we've talked about the business case for ESG, but if we were to dig a bit deeper into what is ESG, so environmental, we are talking elements around climate change and footprint. We're talking around things of pollution and waste management, so air, water, land, space, biodiversity, so any elements of deforestation, pollution, agriculture, impacts from construction, impacts our activities have on endangered species, overfishing, overuse of natural resources, so fossil fuels, metals, minerals, water, as well as land management. From a social side, we are looking at things around human rights, so forced or child labor, displacement of indigenous people, personnel data breaches, low wages, job insecurities, labor relations. We're talking about diversity and inclusion, gender, disability, religion, racial or ethnic minority, age, sexual orientation. We're talking about health and safety of our employees, our customers, our suppliers. And we're also talking about the impacts on our communities. So community neglect, the kind of social investment projects that we have, and displacement. Governance will look at structure, board independence, incentives and remuneration, representation and oversight, risk management, so sustainability plans, cybersecurity breaches, stakeholder management, corruption and bribery, political contributions, related party transactions, unsuitable causes, money laundering, tax evasions, and ethics, so conflict of interest, compliance, complaints and grievance management mechanisms, personnel data sharing, and anti-competitive behavior. So when you look at the definition of ESG as the three central pillars of sustainability, you can see the breadth of ESG and sustainability. And what I keep telling people is don't think that you need to get 100% on this test, because I don't think there's anybody out there who can get 100% in this test. To try and cover all these areas and to be excelling in all these areas is at this point in time, I think very few, if any, companies can actually do. The key thing is to identify the areas where you can make the most impact as a company, and the areas that can have the most significant impact to you as a company as well, and to focus on those areas. And to help, one of the things that we looked at as part of Kina and InteStrat, the companies that I work for, we've put a health check tool together to help companies, because we felt that this was so important, that companies did not think that they had to do everything but could focus on key areas. And the idea is that companies can go in and answer a series of questions, and then they will get results in a form of a wheel like this of all aspects of environmental, social, and governance. And this will provide a traffic light, red, amber, green, for each of these areas that would help them actually focus on those areas, priority areas. And the reason I put this up here is just to emphasize that key point. The key thing is to choose your priority areas and to focus on those, and not try to just do the whole spectrum or just try to do a PR job of the whole spectrum. So we've talked about the business case. We've talked about what is ESG. We've talked about the global trends. So what is the role of leadership in integrating sustainability into businesses effectively? The first thing is vision. What is the vision of the company? And do they see themselves as having a purpose beyond just making profits? And I would challenge that if any company says, no, I do not have a purpose beyond making profits. I would turn that and say, that's fine if that's your vision, but how are you going to create profits, or how are you going to protect value if you don't focus on the things that can influence your profits? And therefore, when you're looking at the vision, you should be looking at the broader spectrum of how can I actually create my purpose and enable my purpose to be delivered. So actually having it at the highest level of leadership is very important. Most people would say at the board level. I would say at the highest level of leadership. If you're an SME with 2-3 people, it's those 2-3 people, if they're sitting in your leadership team, that should have that vision. So that leads to this board focus. It's not just companies that have boards, it's any company, and whichever structure it uses for its management should have this focus. How to help you along? Have you got the right policies? And here I say it doesn't even have to be a 10-page document. It could be a one-statement policy that just triggers the thinking and triggers people into thinking around these areas in their decision making, in terms of sustainability. What is the culture in the organization? Do we see sustainability as, when we looked at the previous slides, as a nice to, a corporate social responsibility, a nice moment to sit there with a massive check and take a nice picture? Or do we believe that this is core to our company and it is core to creating value to our company? And if we can create that culture that it's seen to be core to creating value, the initiatives of sustainability will naturally unveil themselves, because they will come about from day-to-day ways of delivering business. Then it's about planning and KPIs. So how am I measuring my performance against these visions and policies? And how am I actually planning my work in such a way that I'm creating them? Then how is my organization and my resources currently structured? Now, a lot of times here, people would say, well, I don't have a big organization to actually have a sustainability team, a separate sustainability team. Sometimes actually having a separate sustainability team actually holds you back than takes you forward, because what it creates within the organizations is silos. It creates an asset that's the other team's problem. It's a sustainability team's problem to resolve this, rather than it's the business's responsibility to look at this. So actually looking at an organization and allocating your resources and your accountability across the organization is potentially the best way to create a culture of sustainability. And if you're bigger and you can support a separate sustainability team, excellent. Why not have that? Because they can bring you the experience, the expertise, but it should be put and structured in such a way that is clearly embedded within the business, and they are supported to be able to deliver, rather than left on their own to deliver all this. leaders' engagement, do they just talk about this in the boardroom, or do you see them in their activities when they're talking to employees? Are you actually seeing them as part of the implementation? And then functional integration leading to the elements around organization and resources as well. Clear responsibilities that integrates the business rather than a nice to have. So that's all well and good in terms of fine, I understand what it is, and I understand how important it could be to my business, but where can I get guidance in terms of helping me in terms of wanting to implement this? And there's a whole range of guidance out there. There's international, national, and local legislation, and we've picked up on some of these along the discussion. There's financial and multilaterals like the IFC, Equator Principles, that they have some really good and detailed guidance around the environmental and social performance standards that they use for entities that they provide financing to, but are available to all entities as good practice. Your international standards, there's reporting elements. There's a lot of work being done around consolidation of reporting with the GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, SAB, IFRS, which provides is the main body that provides accounting standards. And these are all coming together to say accounting, your financial statements now should not just provide financial data, but should have standards around the level of sustainability data that's presented on there. And there's also a shift away from just presenting activities and costs, a shift towards actually reporting on impacts. What was your real impact, not just how much money you spent? Depending on what industry you're in, there's global institutions such as IPICA, which is for oil and gas. There's the Institute of Corporate Responsibility. There's the International Council on Mining and Metals that also provide detailed guidance. There's case studies, real life examples of companies of what they've done well, not done well, and we've touched upon some of those today. There's your company policy, in terms of, what we talked about, leadership and having those. And then the United Nations as well through the SDGs have a lot of guidance that's out there. Again, these can be quite overwhelming. There can be quite a lot of them there. And sitting there, well, how and what do I need to apply? The questions I would ask is, first, what are my regulatory requirements? What do I have to comply with? Then, what are my business fundamentals? What are the areas that my business activities impact? And then start looking for the guidance around there. And then what is my industry context? Some industries have a lot more, I'd say, spotlight on them when it comes to sustainability, like the extractives. And therefore, you see a lot of industry guidance around extractives. Some might not. And actually find a balance based on the regulatory requirements, your business fundamentals, and your industry context to create your environmental and social management system. And these are a set of policies, procedures, tools, and internal capacity to manage your ESG risks. And what I'd say here is there's a lot of guidance out there on what should be included within an ESMS, and the IFC has one of them. But I would say it's better to have an ESMS than not to have an ESMS. And therefore, having one that is more focused around you and your organization and that's fit for purpose for your organization based on the priority areas that you've selected is more important than having this perfect ESMS that goes on for pages and you've got an external consultant to come in and it's best in class, but you don't actually use it. So actually have something that's fit for purpose for your business that helps you manage your risks and actually helps you create value for your business. And once you've got that in place, by identifying your key priority areas, as saying, so what is my strategy and my plan to tackle these key priority areas? So that's your ESMS and your ESMP. So this is the last slide that I do want to spend a bit of time on this slide, because I think as we've gone through a lot of the discussions, A lot of it can be, okay, I kind of get it, or it's still, I feel like it's too much for me with where I am as an organization. Some of these questions are questions that I hope people will take away and actually reflect on, because these questions come at it from a business perspective, not from a sustainability perspective. And it's questions like, is sustainability a key consideration for your current or target clients? This is all about how am I going to grow and maintain my client base? What additional business opportunities could I actually tap into if I was to focus on ESG? Could I manage my costs or my schedule better if I was to improve on my ESG side? What about my risks? Could I manage some of these risks better? Do I need further financing, whether it's debt or equity? And actually having more sustainable practices might actually open up more avenues for me in this space. And could the climate change or other environmental social impacts actually affect my supply chain? And if it does, what is it that I can do to protect my supply chain? And then how aware are my employees on sustainability? Because if they're not aware, there's probably great opportunities out there that are not coming to the table because they're not aware about sustainability. Or there are huge risks that are sitting there just waiting to explode, but nobody can deal with them because they're not aware of them. So actually by creating more awareness, I can actually protect my business from a risk perspective and create more opportunities for myself. So that's, what are the key value adding sustainability KPIs? So what are the priorities for me? Liability. What are the key regulations and disclosure requirements on my business? Are there any conflicts of interest that could affect it? Could I create a better organization through elements such as diversity? Could I actually create more impact with my corporate social responsibility projects, and not just, kind of that moment, a PR moment that's there? And actually, how reliable are my governance and internal control structures? And is there value leakage because they're not as reliable? I'm hoping that some of these you can see that we can look at sustainability as a good to do because we are global citizens, or we can look at it from a perspective of we are business people. And therefore, we are protecting our business, but we're creating businesses that have a much broader vision beyond just making profits. And by having a broader vision beyond just making profits, we're actually building businesses that can sustain themselves in the future. So that's what I had for today. I am happy to take any questions from the room.
Thank you, Reshma. That was very informative. So Frederick says, are there organizations that can certify your goods, especially practices?
Yeah. Frederick, thank you for the question. So there are a number of international organizations that provide ESG data and ratings as well that people can go to, and checklists that they can evaluate against. Those are fine from a perspective of looking at it from a almost like a benchmarked against if you need financing, etc. But where you are looking at ESG from a perspective of risk or value perspective, then it's best, and there are a number of ESG consultants and who can actually help come sit with you, go through like the Kina InteStrat checklist that I put up in terms of understanding where you are from an ESG perspective, what your business value drivers are, what your key risks are, and actually help you put the ESMS together and the ESMP together that's fit for purpose for your business, and can help you create that plan going forward. And they can also, by doing that, provide you with that health check or that summary of where you are today in terms of good ESG practices and how you can improve as well. Needless to say, InteStrat and Kina, which I work for, we do provide some of these services as well. But there's us and a number of other consultants who do it too. Thank you for the question, Frederick.
Thank you, Frederick. So waiting for more questions as we try to understand. sustainability from ESG point of view, which is environmental, social, taking care of your people, and then the last one is governance. So I think more sustainability is a way of doing things, restructuring the way we always do things in every business for us to be sustainable. We are in a different season. So we have a second question, Reshma. William Batia says, great presentation. What are your views about gender investing? Is it more inclined towards women? How do we showcase sustainability skills? And thank you.
William, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the question as well. Where there recently there's been a lot of more opportunities around gender investing focused around women, on the basis that in the past it's always been felt that women have been disadvantaged for a number of reasons in terms of their access to financing, and therefore there were special schemes that were needed to be put in place to almost put women on a more even footing in terms of gender investing. Also, there were probably the level of the size of the company, or the risk, the lack of collateral, meant that a different model in terms of a financial model was required when looking at investing in some of the women business, and therefore a specific regime was required for that. I believe that it is required. So in my own views, there's more to that. But I also believe that if you want to create businesses and not just show that you've got women businesses, then you've got to help them, but you've got to help them actually in a way that they start moving into a business flow straight away. So give them that step up, but then start treating them like any other business. But look at the different risk model, because they might have a slightly different risk. For example, the lack of collateral. It's seen in a lot of studies that men tend to have a lot more collateral that they can put under financing than women. In terms of showcasing sustainability skills, I would say it's a lot of people tend to look at a narrower definition of it. By actually looking at that broader definition of sustainability, you have a lot more opportunity to showcase those skills, and linking them with impact can actually also showcase a lot of that. And using some of these companies as case studies to put examples out there is a brilliant way of showcasing some of the sustainability skills. So William, I hope that answers your question on that one. There's another question from Frederick. So are there lending institutions where we have a better chance of getting funding with an ESMS plan? Yes, there are definitely a lot. So the financial institutions have recently put out the principles of sustainable financing that a number of institutions are now adopting. And as part of that, they have to bring the kind of ESG into mainstream financial evaluation. So a lot of the larger institutions will be looking at that. But also you have a lot of the DFIs, so your development finance funding in institutions, and they tend to have a much stronger view around having a right ESMS in place. If you have the right plan in place, it means that I've identified my risks and I know how to manage those risks. If I don't have a plan in place, all they see are the risks, and they don't evaluate you on how you can actually manage those risks. So it puts you on a much lower footing than if you had a plan. A lot of the kind of larger projects now look at them in terms of, even if they're not getting funding from, for example, the IFC, will still say that they follow the IFC environmental and social standards, and therefore would still expect you to meet them and have an ESMS in place as well. So you can still find financial institutions that will lend purely on a financial basis, but over time, those financial institutions themselves are going under so much scrutiny that is expected to reduce significantly. Okay, Frederick, I hope that answers that. There's a question from Avinash on the chat. So Avinash, how can we implement sustainability in a business that is already running? Great question. In the sense of there's never a good time to start. The good time is now, in that sense. And if the business is already running, the kind of steps that I would go through is first to understand what are your business, where is the value of your business coming from? And then what are your risks of that business? And then looking at it from a sustainability perspective. Now, once you've understood your way your business value drivers are, can I actually create more markets for myself by getting new customers? Can I actually get more financing by using more sustainability practices for growth? Can I reduce my risks? Can I improve my supply chain? Can I create new opportunities by more innovation through sustainability? And once I've looked at my risk, is then look, so what now does now my new business model become? And now start embedding those priorities from your vision and your strategy all the way to your implementation plans on the ground. And that's really where true integration and where true value will be created.
Thank you, Reshma. So we have a couple of good feedback comments. So we have Eve says, thank you, Reshma. This was an informative session. Sustainability is the future of humanity, not just business. I hope more businesses will take sustainability seriously and genuinely, not just ticking the box. Reshma, I think we have something on question and answer.
Okay.
From Helen. She says, thank you, Reshma. A very informative and great reminder about the role our businesses can continue to contribute to development and sustainability of our world.
Thank you, Helen. Phyllis, as people are looking at that, I'd maybe post a question out so that people can think about it as well. Sometimes it's accessing people so that they can actually understand that this is critical to business. And if there's any thoughts that you have or any particular areas that we can use to help more people understand the criticality of this from a business perspective, then please also just share that, because we can come across it very sustainability, but actually getting someone else's perspective on how we can break down some of those barriers would be extremely useful, because the more people that we can get on board, the more we can turn businesses into more holistic businesses. So again, if there's any thoughts on that, please do share, and it'll be great to see things from a different perspective as well.
Reshma, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for being a good panelist and a speaker to our SMEs. And everybody else who attended, we are so, so grateful. Please reach out to us, to Reshma, to Invest in Africa. Let us know how we can walk in the journey of sustainability, our business sustainability. Let us work towards narrowing down to what we really do in our everyday life, our everyday businesses. So that is what we are reaching out to. Let us make it just be so personal that we'll be shocked at looking at it. So thank you so much.